Thousands of Ukrainian militants are being killed in Ukraine's unsuccessful counteroffensive. However, these losses are simply not considered in Kiev. You perfectly understand that they have a different goal and a different task. The regime needs by all means to work out the military aid received from the West before the NATO summit in Vilnius on July 11 to 12. This is an accurate calculation. Even this is a counteroffensive. This is all part of a global information and political campaign, which is staged in the West. For their part, these Western directors are rushing Zelensky, confirming their own involvement in the conflict. On June 12, French President Macron said, this is a direct quote, that they have increased the supply of weapons and ammunition, armored vehicles, and also, we have increased logistical support. This is again a direct quote from Macron. According to the calendar, which he announced to Zelensky, they will continue to do this in the coming weeks. End of quote. Does this person say anything else about the peace and about some settlement plans? Wait. Either the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, or it's a lie. It seems to me that the whole world understands that this is a lie. The US is also adding fuel to the fire. On the same day, June 12, Secretary Blinken said that Washington was determined to continue providing maximum support to Ukraine so that it could succeed on the battlefield. This is absurd and wild. These are absolutely illogical things from the point of view of a sane person, or someone who at least knows how to analyze data. Anthony Blinken promised a massive new package of political and military aid. In the perverted understanding of the Westerners, the supply of weapons and incitement to hostilities allegedly lead to peace. They say so too. This is also their logic. That is, according to Blinken, in order to start negotiations, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers must die trying to kill as many Russians as possible. They call it peace, justice, truth, and so on. You won't find this in any of the most terrible, deceitful and nightmarish plots. It seems to me that not a single director of a single thriller has thought of this before. What these political directors in the White House have thought of, in turn, the Kiev regime, in order to please the West, persistently and on principle rejects any opportunity for negotiations. I will remind again for all those who ask about our reaction to peace initiatives. The Kiev regime has blocked all possibilities for negotiations at the legislative level. I am not sure that there is such a precedent in the world when any regime, when any ruling elite would forbid itself from negotiating with anyone else. Well, it happened in Ukraine. On June 11th, an advisor to the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Mr. Podolyak, said, now directly quoting, that there are no Indonesian, Brazilian, or African foundations to start negotiations at all. As he claims, this is a direct quote, the negotiations would become meaningless, dangerous and deadly for Ukraine and for Europe in general. Do you see this logic? In principle, we are already used to it if in their communities they call men women, and they call women men, and they call children gender neutral. Probably, this logic is also justified there, and it can exist, but in a world where there are constants confirmed by the course of history, this logic is wild. It is anti-logic. We drew attention to the information published in the United States on the subject of Ukrainian neo-Nazism. As part of the project of the popular publication The Forward, Ukraine ranked first in the world in terms of the number of objects dedicated to the Nazis and their accomplices, including street names and monuments. There are 362 of them in total, so where else to turn away? That's all. Despite this, many Western politicians and public figures continue to assert that there is no fascism in Ukraine. Wait, if there is no fascism, what to do with the glorification of the fascists and their collaborators? We recommend looking at the map of Ukraine, where these objects are marked. Their overwhelming majority is located in the west of Ukraine. I would like to once again return to the disaster at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station. The Zelensky regime is trying to simulate an investigation into its destruction. They rejected it in an absolutely boorish manner. Well, that's the only way they communicate with the international community now because they're blackmailing the international community. It's not just provocative behavior. Their behavior has a special meaning. They demonstrate to the international community that they are ready to do anything to achieve their goals. What are their goals? Now this is the preservation of its own regime. So, in a boorish manner, they simply rejected the initiative of the president of Turkey to create an international commission. Let me remind you that the so-called Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Kuleba, called the Turkish initiative a game of giveaway with the Russians. This is fine? The Kiev regime decided to resort to the services of the politicized and, as you understand, tarnished and discredited International Criminal Court. Let me remind you that the activity of this structure is not recognized by 120 countries of the world. This commission, under the auspices of this structure, was brought to Kherson not by anyone, but personally by the director of the CIA, William Burns. This is the kind of justice when American intelligence services bring commissions of what is, as it were, an international legal mechanism to the scene of a crime. What's this? Is this some kind of new international structure where the head of the American intelligence service is the prosecutor? Of course, the goal here is obvious. It is to clean up the traces of Ukraine's crime and create a picture of our country's guilt in the destruction of the hydroelectric power station. According to the law of the genre, after that, the guilty Russian officials will be declared by them. Of course, they will again issue pseudo-warrants for their arrest, and so on. In principle, they have repeatedly worked out the entire scenario for all these years. All this gives the impression of another cheap theatrical production, but at the same time very expensive for those who fell victims of this terrorist act. We have not forgotten the provocations of the Kiev regime with many innocent victims in the city of Bucha. So far, the Kiev regime has not provided the United Nations with a list of people it claimed to have been killed by the Russian armed forces. Not only we asked them, but also we asked the United Nations Secretariat. The reaction of the Kiev regime is zero. Please tell me, what is this? Is this some kind of unethical moment? Provide a list of those they showed. This is what they showed. That is, you can show it on TV, but you can't say who these people are? Is this some new twist on human rights? Of course not. This is all a falsification that the Germans worked out technologically during the Second World War. The same goes for the Mariupol Maternity Hospital, the Drama Theater, Kramatorsk, Irpin and other places. The practice of creating and distributing fakes is well known from the productions of the Anglo-Saxons and Europeans, and, of course, international terrorism can still be learned from the SIPSO and all these information services of the Kiev regime. It seems to me that no one has yet reached such a level of disinformation and information terrorism, but they have someone to learn from. Let's remember the Skripal case, the poisoning of Litvinenko, the Navalny story. No honest investigation into any of these provocations was carried out. Do you remember how they met this Berlin patient with honors in a cordage and took him to the place of rehabilitation in Germany? Do you remember this, Tupel? Do you remember how Merkel visited him? Do you remember how public attention was? They immediately blamed everyone. They immediately named the culprits. Question 1. What happens to the investigation? What happens to the materials that they could and should have handed over to our law enforcement officers who were involved in this case? There were many requests from the Russian side. Did they do something? No. Nothing. They needed the whole theatrical production only at that particular moment for certain purposes. to try to influence our internal political situation. The terrorist attacks against Area Dugina, Vladlen Tatarsky, the attempted murder of Zakhar Prilpin and sabotage on the North Streams and on the Crimean Bridge are still being investigated. What has been done by the world community, which is so worried about the purity of the genre, about the legal aspects, and about the investigations on this track? Where are the human rights reports? Where are the special rapporteurs of various international structures? We know the answer: they are not interested.